Peace and blessings, respect and honor. Today I'm going all the way controversial, and it's with a heavy heart that I feel compelled to do so. Today I'm talking about the dehumanization of brown-skinned humans. The dehumanization of brown-skinned humans. And as a woman with brown skin, whether you want to call us Black, African American, African, Moorish, Negro, we're humans, first and foremost. Humans. When you take away all the isms and the social constructs, we're humans with brown skin. And as a woman with brown skin, as a parent, as a mother of a son, a child with brown skin, I feel it imperative that I address this issue. And oftentimes people say, oh, well, you tend not to touch on the controversial issues. And I usually don't touch them if they lead to argument and back and forth banter. Anyone who knows me knows I don't have the time nor the inclination nor the patience for back and forth banter with anyone. My time is too precious. It's platinum coated. But I have to go here because everyone is affected by the dehumanization of brown-skinned humans globally. Specifically, today I'm talking about the dehumanization of brown-skinned humans in North America, in the Americas, in the States, because that's been my experience. I have not experienced this in my travels. Not saying it doesn't exist, but my predominant experience is in the Americas. And I'm here to tell you, it does not matter if you are Mexican, Indian, Native American, Jamaican, Iranian, Brazilian, or if you call yourself white or Caucasian, you are affected by the dehumanization of brown-skinned humans. And the goal of this dehumanization, the goal, whether conscious or unconscious, is to incite untold levels of anger, which will possibly lead to a race war, as Charles Manson speaks of in Helter Skelter. Educate yourself about Charles Manson's philosophy on Helter Skelter, which ironically proved to stimulate and inspire the Beatles. Helter Skelter. And his philosophy behind Helter Skelter speaks of an apocalyptic race war coming from the tension between blacks and whites in North America, which, would then, of course, stretch out all across, theoretically, the world. But reading the news headlines this week, last week, last month, last year, 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012, sounds like the period between 1816 through 1967 all over again. This is a purge type symbolism. The same as in the movie, a purge of the undesirables. And who do you think the undesirables are? And so the murder and lynchings are not new, but are seemingly more prevalent due to, the increase in cell phone cameras and the fact that we all live in a surveillance state. But the lynchings have been happening since 1492, and most notably between 1816 and 1967. But it's always happened. And to know this and to acknowledge this is the first step of healing and getting past this ugly stain of our generation and of history even. The end game, again, whether conscious or unconsciously, is a militarized police state, just like we saw in Hunger Games. So when I say it affects everyone, I mean it affects everyone. And let's observe, let's observe the black on black criminality element, because that's where everyone likes to go first. And we'll talk about that. I'm going to touch on that so that we don't have to keep revisiting it. But what you see in that element is a derivative, if you will. It's a byproduct. It's an effect, and it's post-traumatic slave syndrome, and it's also the Willie Lynch syndrome. And I've heard people say, "Oh, that's not real. That's not factual. It doesn't have any historic basis." There's no proof. There's plenty of proof. Again, reading the news headlines is proof that the Willie Lynch syndrome is alive and well. And it's all equating to the dehumanization and the devaluation of brown-skinned humans, and to look at the life of brown-skinned humans as less than, is inferior. It has no worth. That's what it equates to. And Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about this in her book titled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which I encourage everyone to take a look at. She's an amazing intellectual, amazing scholar, an amazing author. She just happens to be from Los Angeles like myself, but I respect her because she did a lot of thorough investigating in compiling her work. But this post-traumatic slave syndrome, it speaks to America's denial. And even when you look back at apartheid South Africa, you observe the dehumanization, again, of brown-skinned humans. In a historically black African country dominant with brown-skinned humans, you still see this dehumanization. And we have to look at apartheid South Africa and look at South Africa and how they handled that situation with the help of instrumental people like Nelson Mandela. I think that it's important that we take note from them. It's an older country, and the struggle that we see today in the States, they've been there, done that, so to speak. But what's ironic, with the whole black on black violence and crime, yes, there is that element is there, but you have to ask yourself why it's there, and why do we see it in the proportion that we see it? Because back in the early 1900s, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, when you saw brown-skinned humans forming communities and forming their neighborhoods, and you saw the black Wall Streets, and you saw the Rosewoods, you saw black-owned stores and markets and tailors and shoemakers, and you did not see the black-on-black crime element that you see today, and you have to wonder why. And so I'm going to touch on that. And also this speaks to those who say, well, blacks can be racist too. And here's the difference. Here's what's adversely affected by the lives of brown-skinned people due to white supremacy and racism. Housing, which is one of the most important factors of our lives. Housing, affordable housing, where we live. Healthcare, access to healthcare or the lack thereof. Education, higher learning institutions and the lack thereof. Criminal justice. How many of you know justice is not blind? Justice is not blind. Justice goes to whoever has the coin, whoever has the finances, and jobs. So housing, healthcare, education, criminal justice, and jobs. These are just a handful of things that are adversely affected by the lives of brown-skinned people due to the scourge of white supremacy. These things do not adversely affect anyone who is non-brown skinned. None of these things are affected collectively by non-brown skinned humans due to black racism. So again, let me reiterate, black racism, people who are pro-black or black power and are pan-African in nature, who hate white people, quote unquote, their hatred, their anger is a byproduct, and it does not adversely affect any type of non-brown skinned humans' housing, healthcare, education, criminal justice, nor jobs. Racism requires power, and it implies the power to impact the victims of racism. So because America is still in denial due to that post-traumatic slave syndrome, we still feel the tension and the festering anger and anxiety and fear, and we have to address it. We have to touch it. We have to dialogue. We have to talk about it. We do not want to talk about it. We are so eager to put it behind us. And non-brown skinned humans are quick to say, well, he or she is playing the race card. Everything isn't about race. And that's easy to see when your experience and how you are treated and the factors that most affect your life are not contingent upon the color of your skin. And again, the longer we try to avoid the conversation, the worse it gets. And even in a time where we have a quote unquote African American president, we still see again the festering anger, anxiety, and fear. And we see the violence escalating like never before. Never before. Statistically speaking, the level of police homicide against unarmed, innocent American citizens. None of us are the court. None of us are the judge. None of us are the jury. So we cannot play judge or jury. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. But when we see on camera something happen to an unarmed, innocent American citizen, something has to be done. When you're starting to see that happen and escalate statistically. Redlining. Let me touch on that for just a second. Redlining, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but denying brown-skinned humans home mortgages and or business loans, that has and does dehumanize them. And there was a period of time where the Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the entity and the instrument over housing and who gets home loans, for a long time they practiced something called redlining, where basically they drew a red line on the maps of most communities. So take, for instance, California or Illinois or New York, and anywhere south of that red line, which was more than likely predominantly Black people, brown-skinned humans, where they lived, if they wanted to move, if they wanted to get a home loan, obtain a home loan, they were denied systematically, robo-denied. And this was an ongoing process for years, and it wasn't talked about, and it was largely unknown until, later on it came out. And because of this, brown-skinned humans were locked out of opportunities and ability to build a financial future through home ownership. And we still see this to this day with the denial of business loans. So brown-skinned humans, especially notably here in the States, have to fight a little harder and be a little more creative, and the odds are already against them. They're starting at a deficit, whereas others are getting those home loans, they're getting the financing, they're getting the small business loans, they're getting the cherries, the prime property at great rates, great interest rates. They're giving a head start, if you will. And so this guarantees them certain privileges and wealth. American chattel slavery, as we know it, destroyed and desolated our relationships. This is something we have to address. We have to touch on it. We have to talk about it. We have to have these conversations, because American chattel slavery, as we know it, it erased our links to our heritage, our culture, religion, language, gods, and our land. No other people over the course of 400 plus years had their heritage, their culture, their religion, their language, their gods, and their land systematically lynched, beaten, and erased from their collective cultural memory. Even the Italians and the Irish, when they came to Ellis Island, they still had their culture, their customs. They still had their foods. They had their religion. They had their language. They were able to move freely. As long as they could find work and housing, they were able to establish their own communities. The same with Arabs and many West Indians. When they've migrated to other countries, South Americans and Central Americans who come to North America, they all still have, again, their heritage, their culture, their customs, their foods, their music, their religion. They bring it with them, and they're able to maintain and build on their culture. Well, that was systematically destroyed for brown-skinned humans through American chattel slavery. And so now we are seeing the repercussions of that, and also understand that for 240 plus years of documented American chattel slavery, we know that it guaranteed the progeny and future generations of slave owners to have untold wealth for centuries, and they are reaping the benefits of free labor for 250 plus documented years. That doesn't include the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade and, the diaspora, people being dropped off at various islands, again, to perform free labor. And this 240 plus years of American chattel slavery would also guarantee the progeny and future generations of slaves that would incur debt and powerlessness for centuries. And so what was built into the fabric of American culture was this duality. And so America is a very young country in comparison to, some of the countries in Europe and Africa. And it's a very new concept. It's a continent. It is also a business. How many of you know the USA is a business? It's a corporation, but it is a continent, a landmass, and a business that is very unique in scope. And before American chattel slavery, we read about how the dehumanization and erasure of Native Americans was prevalent. Again, still the dehumanization of brown-skinned humans, because Native Americans are brown-skinned humans. And when these so-called settlers were slaughtered through the Trail of Tears, and whether they were Cherokee or Creek or, you name it, it was a victory when they were slaughtered wholesale. But notice the language. When the natives fought back, it was called massacre or mutiny. Okay? And look at how the lexicon, we still use that lexicon today. So when we see a brown-skinned young man being beat down and cut down and shot down in the streets in front of his children, we say, oh, he must have deserved it. It was his fault. He didn't comply. We thought he had a weapon, when really the only thing he was guilty of, first and foremost, is having brown skin. And every time we see that, something psychological happens. Notice blacks are the only group in America, in the States, who do not have communities. We have residential neighborhoods. And this too is a result of 400 years of dehumanization of brown-skinned humans. We don't have communities. Every group has community. Wherever you go, just about, you will see a Chinatown or a Little Italy or an area community where the Mexican culture is, or El Salvadoran culture is, or Jamaican culture, or Trinidadian culture, where they have their stores. You have your little Jewish communities where they're able to buy their, the foods that they love from Israel, and they have their temples, they have their synagogues, and every community has a little area that they can call their own. And the crux of it is that quote unquote black people do not have anything like this, because yes, we are American. This is all we've known. We've never known a history in Ghana or Mali or Cape Verde, but all we know is America. So we're American. We speak English. We're assimilated as Americans, yet we don't have any of the benefits and the privileges and the rights that non-brown skinned humans have. We have some rights. We definitely have rights on paper, but we're not given access to all of the rights and the privileges. And that is, I'm going to touch on that is by design. Today, we still see this, this cultural violence and dehumanization of brown-skinned people, which psychologically breaks the will. It breaks the will. Again, that is by design. So we're dealing with multi-generational trauma, with continued oppression, to the point where we do not value our own contributions or ourselves. This leads to hopelessness, learned helplessness. How many of you know that helplessness can be learned? This leads to depression, multi-generational depression, and self-destructive behavior, i.e. what we see in Chicago or Chirac, where you just see all levels of violence, where brown-skinned humans don't value the life of another brown-skinned human. This speaks to a marked propensity for anger and violence. Violence against self, against property, and against others. And this is a hallmark, ironically, of abuse victims. The hallmark of abuse victims is cutting and self-mutilation. That's how you know someone has been abused, because they will usually self-mutilate. They usually do not value themselves, so they will allow people to do anything to them. We also see a lot of literacy deprivation and a distorted self-concept even. These are things we don't want to talk about. We want to sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't exist. When in reality, the American chattel slavery system lasted longer than the freedom or the end of that. So we're getting the tail end of 400 plus years of lynching and witnessing brown-skinned human men be castrated and emasculated, and the women raped and sterilized, and free labor, and all entrenched in dire violence and trauma, and without any type of healing. So you see, it's not rehabilitation, prison, or drugs even that brown-skinned humans need, but mental health-centered treatment. Mental health-centered treatment. Because we're dealing with a lot of issues. And it's multi-generational. And we're expected to just function in society as though none of these things have touched us or don't touch us. And so our will is being systematically and psychologically broken. When we witness brown-skinned humans abandoned or left to starve and fend for themselves during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, it was a collective breaking of the will, because what we saw were hundreds and thousands of brown-skinned humans, again, being neglected, abandoned, forced to fend for themselves with no help in contemporary modern day America, with all of our resources and all of our wealth and all of our systems in place. We witnessed what looked like a third world cataclysmic event for those individuals. And again, by design, that systematically and psychologically broke the will to say, here are some powerless individuals that aren't even, they aren't even worth saving. They aren't even worth putting forth an effort to help. The dehumanization of brown-skinned humans also speaks to an aversion towards members of one's own identified culture or ethnic group, i.e., people who own no desire to have black children. Let's talk about it. Black people who have no desire to have black children. And it's a unconscious, subconscious thing, but these people would prefer, lighter skinned progeny or exotic looking progeny, mixed progeny, because they don't want to look at the black face, and they don't want their children to experience the trials and the tribulations and the heartache and the heartbreak that comes with having brown skin in America. There's an aversion towards the physical characteristics of one's own cultural ethnic group. So, i.e., you have the skin bleaching, you have the chemically altering the natural state of one's hair, you have the plastic surgery to alter the features, making the nose smaller, making the lips thinner, again, bleaching the skin, changing the entire chemical makeup of the hair so as to look less ethnic, so to speak. So So, these are things that we don't want to talk about it because it's painful and it's embarrassing and it hurts. And we would rather not deal with it. But again, if we don't deal with it, I'm here to tell you, it will come back to bite us in the worst way. We see this in the mass incarceration of brown-skinned humans. The sheer numbers of men and women whose lives are destroyed because of unfair laws, unfair gun laws, unfair drug laws. You have brown-skinned humans who don't get the same treatment or access to criminal justice as others. We see this in eugenics in the form of wholesale slaughter and or sterilization of brown-skinned humans. After a while, these individuals just start doing it to themselves. So after you see, for instance, after you've seen someone slaughtering pigs long enough, if you were born and raised on a farm and all your life for 21 odd years, you saw pigs slaughtered, cows slaughtered, chickens, hens, you name it. And that's all you saw every day of your life. Eventually, you wouldn't value those pigs or chickens or hens because you would see them as, they're just sources of food. They don't really hold any value. They're not sacred. In other countries, those animals are sacred. They're as sacred as a god. But someone who just witnessed those animals being slaughtered see them as food, something to be killed, to be eaten or utilized, sold. And so that's what we see now after a while of seeing brown-skinned humans shot down in the streets and flooding you with these images. You begin to dehumanize them in your own mind, in your thoughts, and the life is devalued. When drugs are flown in, they're flown in or shipped in brown-skinned dominant communities. There are no poppy fields in the States. There are no coca plants in Chicago or Compton or Jersey or Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx or Decatur. There are no, how many of you know there are no coca fields and no poppy fields in Miami? They're flown in, they're shipped in, and when they're flown in, they're taken directly and dropped into the brown-skinned dominant communities so they can destroy themselves. Planned Parenthood centers specialize in the fetus and embryos of brown-skinned stem cells. How many of you know this? On the black market, the organs are mainly of brown-skinned individuals. The kidneys, the hearts, the brains. Oh yeah, we gotta touch it. We gotta go there. Ethnic specific weapons. Google, please do your research. Ethnic specific weapons, biological weapons aimed at the nations of brown-skinned humans. So that's why you see all manner of incurable organisms coming out of places like sub-Saharan Africa, out of the bush, Libya, Zaire, Zimbabwe, Brazil. You see the Zika virus. Nations, again, where there are brown-skinned humans. How many of you know that they genetically engineered these mosquitoes and dumped them over Brazil? via vaccines, etc., chemical weapons, and directed energy. How many of you know that it's amazing what they can do with directed energy? And they can direct it to certain communities, certain neighborhoods. So what will promote our healing? And I say a thorough wake-up call. We have to be vigilant about having these conversations at home, in our schools, in our churches, in our temples, in our synagogues. We have to get vigilant about having these conversations and dialoguing with one another. And we have to hash it out. And we have to wake up and stop living a lie with blinders on like it's not going on. Call it what it is. And for many of us, it will require physically leaving the states altogether, because so much of America's history and the fabric of what it's made up of is white supremacy. And we don't want to touch that. You know, some would say it will never be any other way. Some say, you know, this is what America was built on. Free labor, the blood of the Native Americans, the blood of the slaves, and that's the American as apple pie or baseball or jazz or hip hop. And so because of that, it's colored the way the system is, and it's colored the way things will always be. America's default is white male patriarchy. We've always had white male leadership and presidents and Congress and Senate. When you look at the list of millionaires and billionaires and financiers, they're predominantly white male. Every now and then you'll see a sprinkle, a domino dot, but the default is white male patriarchy. And it was all built on chattel slavery, because when this country was formed and built, the wealth didn't immediately come. The wealth had to come from Britain and France and Amsterdam and Belgium, and they got their wealth from plummeting and raping other nations predominant with brown-skinned humans. And so it's always been built on violence. It's always been built on violence. There has never been a time in America where there hasn't been violence. America was built on violence, and everywhere America colonizes, it colonizes with violence and the bullet and intimidation, and thereby phasing out the weaker peoples, whether we're in Libya or whether we're in Iraq or Korea or you name it, there's warfare. So we must acknowledge this, and everything within not only American but European culture supports the quest for world domination. And so you have to understand what you're dealing with. And in order for that to happen, that world domination, that supremacy, that manifest destiny of this patriarchal system, that all we've ever known is that there be a group of have-nots, a group of undesirables. And unfortunately, that group typically is always brown-skinned humans. And they have to be dehumanized, and their will has to be broken in order to maintain this permanent underclass, a permanent class of cheap labor, if you will. So see, it comes back to economics. Always comes back to economics. Always follow the money. Slavery was based on economics. Free labor to fund the cotton industry. Free labor in the Caribbean to fund sugarcane industry and tobacco industry. Hawaii before it was colonized, sugarcane. Everywhere around the world, you see dehumanization of brown-skinned humans for the economic benefit of another group of people. And so Chancellor Williams talks about this in his book, Destruction of Black Civilization, and how we must get organized. Organization starts with your dollar. You vote every day with your dollar. You may go to the polls every 4 years, but you vote every day with your dollar. What you invest money in is what you support, and vice versa. Where you pull away your funds. Nothing can survive without financing. And this includes investing in our own communities, building our own banks, investment clubs, schools, places of worship, grocery stores, and co-ops, utilizing food we grow and harvest ourselves. Withdraw your money from organizations or people who don't support you or others who are brown skinned. And that goes for if you're Caucasian and you have a platform, or you're a celebrity, or you have great wealth. Use your platform to speak to the situation in front of you, because eventually you will be affected too. You may not see it, but you will be affected too, if you're not already being affected. Lastly, unity. I don't care if you're Christian, Moorish, Muslim, gay, straight, conservative, liberal, baby boomer, millennial. All of us must put aside our differences. All of us are greater when we put aside our. I'm not saying don't acknowledge your calling and who you are and your spirituality, but we have to put aside the petty differences and get united, and unite financially with where we're spending our money and what we're doing with our economic voice. This has to happen. It has to happen. Because, again, we're all affected. We must build our own means of production. Factories, plants, warehouses, and our own lines of distribution to slowly reawaken and empower brown-skinned humans. Self-determination. Don't let people tell you who you are. Call yourself by your name, not a name that has been given to you or chosen for you. Self-determination. Determine your own direction, where you will go, what you will fight for. Knowledge of self. Know your history. Dr. Maya Angelou said, the more you know your history, the more liberated you are. And many of us are destroyed for lack of knowledge, lack of a vision. We don't even know who we are because that's been cut off from us. And so the first key is waking up to who you are. Self-determination, knowledge of self, self-love, and then mental health support and independence. We have to get some semblance of independence, because as long as we continue to depend on the powers that be, the powers that shouldn't be, but the powers that be, will continue to be victimized and dehumanized by a broken system that refuses to acknowledge us. So I'll leave you with that today. I bid you farewell. I pray that you stay strong through these times and love one another. This isn't the time to bicker and debate with anyone, but to love one another and get strong and stay woke. Peace. See you next week.